6 road teams start new quarterbacks this week. We'll tell you how to navigate the carnage on this week's Football Guys Daily Fantasy Power Grid presented by DraftKings. We're going to be talking about the Week 3 main slate, and we always kick that off by talking about Las Vegas. John, tell us, what are the Las Vegas lines speaking to you? What are they whispering to you this week?
They're whispering history. I mean, I've been doing the Vegas value chart on the site now for 5 years, I think. And we have broken a record from my recollection of the heaviest favorite in the history of the Vegas value chart. And not only have we done it once, we've done it twice. Dallas and New England this week, both are, as of Thursday night, 22.5-point favorites over Miami and the Jets, respectively. That means Sony Michel, Zeke Elliott, we're going to have to talk about them, how much they play, and whether or not they're going to be worth their respective salaries. Speaking of running backs, we've got 7 teams who are a touchdown or more favorites. And so what that's going to mean is going to be a slew of running backs this week that we're going to want to jam into those lineups. And it's going to make for some interesting game strategy decisions in terms of tournaments, and certainly going to make your cash game builds very, very similar. Team totals, the 12 highest teams this week, all of which are at home. Only one road favorite, and that's the Bears, -4 over the Redskins. So a lot of chalk this week, and traditionally, just anecdotally, I'll say that doesn't always work out well for people who like to play a lot of chalk, especially in those GPPs. So going to be an interesting week where Vegas is concerned, how you make those lineups. So stay tuned for the next 55 minutes, and we'll walk through each of those positions and talk about how you can really exploit some angles to potentially pull down some big money in those tournaments.
And we'll start by some of that information we led the show off with. There's 6 road quarterbacks that are new starters for their teams for a variety of reasons. We've got Drew Brees out. We've got Roethlisberger out. Cam Newton does not look like he's going to play. We've got a couple of Jets quarterbacks out, and then a couple of starters that are getting pulled in Eli Manning and Ryan Fitzpatrick. I don't know that all of this is fantasy relevant necessarily, but it's just a lot of change that could impact the other players on these teams as well, or the teams they're facing. Devin, kick us off with some quarterbacks. How does all this change affect who you're playing this week?
Yeah, it doesn't really.
Okay.
I'm not taking any of these clowns.
Say it, Dev. Say it, brother.
Yeah, I'm not. I work too hard for my money, and I'm not playing Mason Rudolph, and I'm not playing Kyle Rudolph. I'm not playing Santa's Rudolph. I'm not playing any of these guys. I'm going and
you had to say the Steelers guy.
He has the most whatever. I'm going in cash games like I am every single week. Patrick Mahomes until he reaches a price that is obscene. At 7,600 on DraftKings, he's simply too cheap. He's almost a lock for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns every single week. And it just makes you feel good. So it's a fun offense to watch. I know the matchup is a little bit tough with Earl Thomas and Marlon Humphreys in Baltimore, but I look at this offense as completely matchup proof and one that you just play in cash. In GPPs, I have a couple different guys. So a couple guys who've struggled a little bit, but the guy that I'm going to go with, I'll leave the most obvious one, but Jameis Winston. Jameis has struggled this year, but the Giants have really struggled this year. So they allowed 405 yards and 4 touchdowns to Dak. Josh Allen threw for 253 last week. Janoris Jenkins is a shell of what he used to be, and DeAndre Baker and Antonio Hamilton alongside him have struggled as well. So, and you kind of have to wonder if this game gets out of hand a little bit. You know, they just benched Eli. They know their season's kind of in a transition period in week 3. Is it a get-right game for Tampa? And then going all the way down, and I'm expecting some red black-eyed Joes here, is Matt Stafford for the Lions. So the Eagles have allowed 300 yards passing twice this year. They've allowed 3 touchdowns passing twice this year. And they've allowed 3 receivers to go for over 100 yards this year. So Stafford isn't the quarterback, the high volume quarterback that he used to be, but to beat the Eagles, they have probably one of the best run defenses in football, and to beat them, you beat them through the air. So those are the three guys. There's a couple other obvious guys in GPPs that I'll leave for the other guys, but that's who I'm looking at.
Speaking of obvious guys, Ryan, I'm going to pitch it to you. Who do you like at quarterback?
Interesting segue.
Because Devin called you out for picking the obvious plays like on the last show,
No,
right?
that was John. Week 1, John called me out
week
for that.
1, yeah.
So thank
okay.
you. Yeah, no, it actually was not a good segue, but a good callback. So, if you look at ownership, you don't necessarily want to take the guys at the top of the list, but quarterback's a position where you can get away with it because it tends to be a bit flatter. I mean, the highest guys right now, Steve has projected it under 10%. So I'm going to look at Kyler Murray this week in GPPs because the yardage is there, the attempts are there, the air yards are there. The only thing not there is touchdowns, and touchdowns tend to follow yards and attempts. So Kyler Murray this week is somebody – this week, next week, I mean, for the foreseeable future, I think he's somebody that I want to be kind of ahead of before the touchdowns start to come, as opposed to buying in after we finally see them come. And outside of Murray, another GPP play I like is Josh Allen. I mean, what does this guy have to do to kind of get to the front of mind here for everybody? He's been a QB1 for dating back to last year. I think it's something like 5 out of his last 7 games, including both weeks this year. He's been on the road both weeks this year. He now goes home. He faces a Cincinnati team with just an awful secondary. And so he's got a chance to put up a lot of points here and remain a QB1. Speaking of Allens, and I know I'm going to get some red black-eyed Joes here, but $4,000 on DraftKings, you have a starting quarterback against Arizona, who has proven to be a great matchup so far this year, in Kyle Allen for Carolina. Who's to say Kyle Allen will not be a better passer than Cam Newton has been so far this year? Certainly the weapons are there in DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel, who are getting a lot of redraft buzz going into the season. Greg Olsen is a guy I'm sure we'll talk about later in the show here. And Kyle Allen is so cheap. The lineup you can make with Kyle Allen in it is saliva-inducing almost. So he's somebody that – and he's going to be under 5%, maybe even under 3%. So he's somebody I'm looking at just to toss into a GPP lineup. He's going to have a lot of attempts against a fast team. So – for dirt cheap, you guys know I love a cheap quarterback, so I'm a sucker for it.
I gave you the obvious guy, and you don't take him. John, can you please say
I went
this?
GPP only. GPP only.
I mean, I'm off my game. He said saliva-inducing.
That's right.
Can somebody mention Dak Prescott, please?
Yeah, so you've done it all 3 weeks now. I was waiting on you. You did it
I'll
in
talk
week
about
1.
him if he's not – I'll talk about him.
Right now he's early MVP, right? I mean, I don't know. I think
You're familiar with Patrick Mahomes, aren't you?
Yeah, well, he's not going to make the Super Bowl like the Cowboys are. So, yeah.
Wow.
All right. Bold proclamation. I actually do think the Cowboys are legit this year, and I'm a Cowboys fan, and so you take it for what it's worth. But I'm typically their biggest critic. Anyhow, for what it's worth, I think I've heard a lot of good commentary. I don't know what you guys off the bottle tonight or what? I mean, everybody's, I love all the picks. I think you've checked off like all but one of mine on my list here. So kudos to you guys. Dak Prescott, by the way, I think Steve Buzzard has him right now as the number 1 owned quarterback in GPPs on DraftKings going into Friday. So we'll see how that holds up. 2 names that are on my list that you guys haven't mentioned. It's going to be interesting when we get to running backs here. We'll talk about all the running backs, and they're all high-end running backs that you want for your cash games and probably for your GPPs by proxy. You're going to have to save some salary somewhere. And as much as I love Mahomes, and I held up the yellow black-eyed Joe for Devin, I think that Kyler Murray is cash game viable as well at 5,800 on DraftKings and 10.5 on Fantasy Draft. They're just running so many plays in that game. I'll give you a little bit of a cheat code this week. Game stack that game. That's the number one and number 2 paced offense in the NFL going into week 3. They're running a slew of plays, and you're going to get a lot of return on investment in terms of dollars per play, or plays per dollar, I guess is the right word there.
Do you have concern with – can we just talk about that real quick? Do you have concern that they were behind pretty significantly in the first half of both games and they had to throw? Like, that's the concern that I have.
But their neutral pace is still really high. I pulled it up here quickly. They're neutral they're sixth in the NFL.
But they only ran the ball 7 times against Baltimore. So I don't know if Murray's going to throw 40 times like he did last week.
Well, remember, their defense is horrible. So they're not going to win a game 24-6. Unlikely, right? So I have Carolina as the second.
They're playing Kyle Allen, so they very easily could just – I mean, the Panthers could just grind this one out with McCaffrey. That's the worry I have.
I don't know that they can. Do you really believe that with Allen at quarterback? I mean, it's this.
I think they're going to try and limit possessions.
Well, I don't know. What I'm saying is the same thing that Ryan's saying. Arizona's second fastest. You're right in terms of neutral situation, and Carolina's sixth. So these are two very rapid moving offenses. And at 5,800, I feel like if I'm going to take a risk. Quarterback, these guys are going to get a lot of plays. I like to spend down a quarterback if I can. Patrick Mahomes has made that pretty tough. And last week, I just pretty much went all in on Patrick Mahomes in cash, and that worked out well. But this week, I think, you can mix and match a little bit. Maybe I'll end up with a little bit of advice about how I do cash games there and what that might mean. GPPs, the one name I didn't hear, I agreed with quite a bit of what you guys said. What about Deshaun Watson this week? He's in a game against the Chargers. I think the Chargers could do a lot. This is a game that could go back and forth. The overall game total on this is 49 points tonight. I suspect that'll get into the 50s over the weekends. And Watson, he does a lot, and he's only last game coming off of Jacksonville. He had 1 touchdown, and that was a rushing touchdown. I'm looking for some regression here. Well, Will Fuller is the guy I like to stack with this week. Nuke Hopkins will be dealing with a little bit of Casey Hayward. I still think he's able to beat him. And then, of course, Kiki Cutie looks like he might be coming back. So a lot of places to go here, including Duke Johnson in the receiving game, who's looked pretty good too. So I think Deshaun Watson will be overlooked because he's kind of in that middle. People are either going to want to spend up for Mahomes or down at the low end to get those running backs. And I think these middle tier guys are going to go under-owned in GPP formats.
He's $100 less than Dak. I'll take Dak all day.
And look, I can look at that, but you're at 10% versus 4%.
Yeah, but 10% versus 4%, we're talking about that's not that big of a difference. It's not like Dak is 20%. 10% isn't that significant. When
you're talking about GPPs and you're stacking that person with somebody else. When you're with Dak this week, who are you stacking him with? And don't say Devin Smith just to be contrary.
Devin Smith.
Most people are going to be doing Amari Cooper. And so what that does is it really hones in your lineup because you're spending, I don't know what Amari is this week, but you're spending $14,000 on that pair. And it minimizes the amount of diversity you can have around those two players. When you're going with a guy who's 4% and there are 3 receivers to go with him, you have a lot more diversity there. And so you have a lot more roster uniqueness associated with it.
That's fair. I mean, it entirely depends on how many lineups you're going to make too. I think that if you're making 10 lineups, you don't need to focus on that nearly as much.
So real quick, are you in cash, Devin? I think I know your answer, but are you just going the extra 600 from Lamar Jackson to Patrick Mahomes and nobody's going to play Jackson in cash, right? At the risk of being obvious, people will ask. That's the game of the week.
Lamar's on my cash game list, but I don't think I'll be playing him just because for $600 more I can have Mahomes.
Yeah, Mark Ingram's the play.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
If you disagree or agree with what we're saying here, mention it in the YouTube comments. We'll try to respond to any questions you have there throughout the week. I would love to hear whether you like our picks or not. And let's talk about running backs. We've got a couple of injuries that we're keeping an eye on. Nothing too huge other than maybe like Marlon Mack didn't practice on Thursday. It doesn't look like he will go, kind of questionable there. And then for Kansas City, Damian Williams didn't practice on Thursday. It looks like he's probably not going to go in this game, but it looks like LaShawn McCoy might go after a limited practice on Thursday.
Josh Jacobs also tweeted about an hour ago that he's lost 10 pounds due to sickness. So that concerns me a little bit.
And allegedly it's a groin injury too. Dr. Gene was worried about a hernia because it said groin and hip or something. So
yeah, it's like early in the week they said groin, but then on Wednesday and Thursday they said hip. He got in a limited practice on Thursday. It sounds like he's going to go, but it's one of those things where it's kind of tenuous. Like, I don't know how confident I'd be.
They're playing the Vikings, so you can just scratch off anybody in that game.
Yeah, you're not playing him anyways.
We saw last week he's entirely game script dependent, and they're a 10-point underdog on the road. Do not play him, even if he says that he's healthy.
Yeah, correct.
Don't get cute. John, tell us more about some running backs you do like this week.
There's a lot this week. Look at, Ezekiel Elliott. He's 22.5-point favorite. I said he's 8,900, so you're gonna have to pay up for him. But this is a week where he legitimately could score 3 touchdowns. And so, you got to try to cram him into your lineup, I think. But if you don't like him, you're anti-Cowboys and you want to go a different direction. We just mentioned the Minnesota Vikings are at home, and they've been really run-heavy this year. And when they're playing ball control, league leader in rushing, I think, is Dalvin Cook, and he's about $1,000 discount from Zeke. So if you want to go that direction, no problems with that. You could go CMC, Christian McCaffrey, 8,700. We already talked about how many plays that game's going to have. You've got a young quarterback there who likely is going to be doing a lot of dinking and dunking to McCaffrey, potentially Greg Olsen. We'll talk about it in a bit. So a lot of different ways to go there. So I think those are all cash game plays. I'll name one GPP play just quickly. I looked at Steve Buzzard's ownership percentages tonight, and I am astounded. I'm blown away, in fact, that Sony Michel was 2.9% when the Patriots are 3 touchdown favorites. Michelle last week, it's funny because recency bias is it drives so much of this ownership. Last week, Sony Michel had 21 carries, but didn't break 100 yards. If he had 21 carries and broke 100 yards, he scored a touchdown. But if he had 100 yards and a touchdown, he would be 5 times the rate that I just referenced. He should be this weekend. Thursday night estimate, he should be 15 to 20% owned. And if he's going off at 3%, that's just crazy. You need to jam him into your lineups, especially at a discount over some of the guys I just mentioned. He's 6,000 on DraftKings and 11,800 over at Fantasy Draft.
Devin, what do you think about those running back picks, and who else do you like?
I don't love Michelle, but I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to fight over it. The Jets would look good up front, and they get CJ Mosley back. But I think Mark Ingram is probably one of the top guys this week going up against the Chiefs. We saw Josh Jacobs even on 12 carries run for 99 yards this past week, and the linebacking core of the Chiefs is really a problem. So Anthony Hitchens and Damian Williams are some of the worst linebacking core in the league, and it's a defense that basically is trying to contain you, not necessarily stop the run, because they're not designed for close games. So we saw Ingram in week 1 have a massive game. This is a game script that Baltimore is going to try to establish the run and keep the Chiefs defense off the field. So he's a guy that I'm looking at. I do like the Ezekiel Elliott call. Anything with Devin Singletary missing?
No, don't say Frank Gore.
Please don't.
Real quick.
Please.
It's a good matchup. I mean, against Cincinnati, it's a good matchup, and he's 4,200, something like that, 4,400.
Are you playing Ingram in cash?
As of now, yes. He's at 5,700.
Not worried about the game kind of getting away from them and the fact that Baltimore just doesn't throw to running backs?
And Baltimore – It's funny because Baltimore used to do 2 years ago, they were number 1 in the league in that, but we haven't seen a situation yet where they've fallen behind. They blew out Miami in week 1, and last week they handled Arizona throughout. How do we know that he's not going to be taking out of the game? The same way that Josh Jacobs. I don't know. Is Dixon going to go in there and catch passes on third down in passing game situation?
Pretty sure Dixon got cut. I think he's not on the team.
Gus Edwards is their backup.
regardless, running quarterbacks tend to not throw to running backs very much because they'd rather just run instead of check down. And I don't think Lamar Jackson is an exception to that rule. When they did it 2 years ago, it was very much just Joe Flacco being safe, conservative Joe Flacco, and he threw to running backs a lot. I don't think that they are going to do that even behind. I think behind you see Lamar Jackson scamper for 80 yards or whatever on design pass plays that just don't work. That's my worry with Ingram, and that's why I asked the question. I no disagreements on the analysis with the linebacking core, and if Josh Jacobs can run for 99, so can Ingram. But
I agree.
Will the
I
game
agree
get
with
away? I just don't know.
I think he
Just for
catches 2
clarity-
to 3 balls like he did last week.
Okay.
For
There's
clarity,
not a high
Kenneth
ceiling,
Dixon,
but
he was cut, and they've thrown four passes to running backs all season. So to me, it's a bit of a risk. But I mean, the logic is there. I think if they keep the game close, it's a good call. But if they get blown out, it scares me.
yeah. And then Austin Eckler is my top guy just because he's I mean, what more does this guy have to do to have his price raised? So he's 7,200 on DraftKings and he's 7,600 on FanDuel. Even in the half-point PPR on FanDuel, I think he's one of, if not the top play this week. It's a situation in which, for me, it's kind of, to John's point, start your top guys. So start Elliott, start Eckler if you can. But my problem is I can only – we'll get to receivers in a minute. It's hard to start both. And I don't know. I don't know. I think that Eckler's probably my top guy. And then, I'll throw Elliott in there in cash and maybe punt at some other positions. But in GPPs, I might get away from Elliott a little bit.
Ryan, do you like I haven't heard Alvin Kamara mentioned yet. I haven't heard Le'Veon Bell mentioned or Chris Carson. Do you like any of those guys? Who do you like at running back?
Yeah, Kamara first Bell. Let's just cross Bell off the list. The usage is going to is going to be there. The ceiling is not.
He could catch 14 passes this week.
I think you can get a better, maybe if I could finish the sentence, I think you can get a better floor and ceiling, certainly a better ceiling off of anyone else in that price range almost. So I'd rather play Elliott. I'd rather play Cook. I'd rather play McCaffrey. Who'd you ask? Carson? Yeah, Carson's on my list here too. Steve has him at 22% right now, which I was kind of surprised it would be that high. I thought maybe there might be a little bit of fumble nervousness, but he is a home favorite. He is only 5,900, and he is still involved in the pass game. So I have Carson on the list. I think I'm a little worried about playing time, so I won't call him a very safe play. But at 22, I don't know. I'll ask John, who's the big multi-entry guy, about whether he wants to go over or under 22%. But before I do, the other guy that I didn't hear mentioned that I like this week is in GPPs only is Matt Breida. So the Steelers are allowing 8.5 receptions a game, which is second most, and 27.5 rush attempts a game for running backs, which is third most. And all he didn't do last week was get into the end zone. But the Steelers did give up a rather lengthy touchdown run to Rashad Penny last week. They gave up a 30-something yarder early in the game to Chris Carson. That defense is not great, and the game script now with Ben Roethlisberger out, Mason Rudolph in, suggests more rushing attempts for their opponents, especially home favorites of a touchdown or more. So he's 1.8%. He's 5,400. Makes for a good dart throw.
John, you don't care for the Breida pick, and I'd be curious about what you think about Chris Carson's ownership level in GPPs.
Sure. To the Breida pick, we saw last week, Jeff Wilson looks like the red zone guy. And Breida doesn't have a single red zone carry all season, despite being the number one back now. That's concerning. They had 7 carries last week in the red zone, and Breida got exactly 0. That scares the heck out of me. I think the matchup is good. The issue there is I heard Ryan say throwing darts. It's a good dart throw, but you could as easily have Raheem Mostert or Jeff Wilson at lower prices who could get into the end zone as well. So that's why I don't like the Breida call.
Yeah, but Breida's the best player, so that's what I was going for.
We agree on that, but that's not the way Shanahan's using them right now. That's a 3-headed monster right there, and I want to have opportunity, and I just don't see, unless he breaks a 20-yard touchdown, I don't see him delivering 4x, 3x value, whatever you're looking for. The Chris Carson comment that the 22% is probably about right for the type of upside he brings to the table. That said, I'll be underweight on him this week. because I think if he's an early fumble away from not playing his full set of downs. He did not look good last week. They showed some confidence. They brought him back. And as long as he doesn't fumble, he could definitely deliver on his salary in that matchup. But if he fumbles, and I think that's a real risk, you could have 22% of your rosters dead on arrival if he were to drop one early in the first quarter. And so for that reason, I'm going to be a little bit underweight, probably between 10 and 15, half the field.
Can we talk about Le'Veon Bell?
Sure.
So let's just play a theoretical. How are the Jets going to move the ball? And maybe the answer is they're not.
You watched on Monday, right?
Gilmore will be on Robbie Anderson, so that's not going to work. We saw Bell catch 10 passes on Monday because Luke Falk was skittish there and just checked it down to Bell, and he was basically the primary receiver. If he catches 10 to 12 balls again, which he should have that upside, I think it's a decent play.
I'm going to fall in the middle, so I'm going to bridge the gap here. I agree with you, Devin, that's all that Falk did last week was just dump off passes to him. We were talking about it in real time on our little chat room for Footballguys about how much usage he was getting after Simeon went out. The problem I have is that the team total for the Jets, we were talking about history on the Vegas value chart earlier, the team total for the Jets is 10.5 points. If they score a touchdown, you got to think that it's Bell. But, Crowder actually has a nice matchup against New England. Slot receivers have been blasting them pretty good. So if Crowder steals that touchdown and Bell ends up with 8 catches and maybe 120 all-purpose yards, that's a great day, but it's still probably not enough to merit GPP value. So I think you're betting on him scoring a touchdown. And if you feel confident that he's going to get there, then it's probably a worthwhile play. But
I don't feel confident about it, but it's one of those things that just because they're 20-point underdogs, we shouldn't overwrite him because he could get those receptions.
Well, stay tuned, everyone, for the rest of the show. But Devin's playing Mahomes for 7,600, Bell for 7,000, and Eckler for 72. So we're going to see who he's playing at the other positions because he's now used up almost half the cap in the first 3 spots. So stay tuned.
Yeah. So before we get to the receivers, thank you guys for hitting our first threshold of subscribers. We crossed the 9,000 mark. Thank you so much. Please continue to subscribe if you haven't. Tell your friends. And because we hit that 9,000 milestone, Devin's got a special contest announcement. #PowerPlay.
Yeah, so we're gonna select 5 people on here. And because we hit 9,000 people, we're going to do a $90 giveaway for those $90 contest for those people. If they can, it's a free contest. If they can beat John, myself, Ryan, and then David Dodds, they will get that $90. So they'll be invited to a contest on FanDuel. So what you have to do is you basically have to enter in your FanDuel name so I can invite you to the contest if you win. And then we'll use a random comment picker and put #PowerPlay?
#PowerPlay. We're picking people based on YouTube comments on this video.
So if you're listening to the podcast, head over to YouTube, put #PowerPlay. We'll announce the winners on next week's show. 5 winners, free contest. If you beat all 4 of us, you get a nice $90 PayPal immediately after the contest. So something fun, and then if we get to 10,000, we'll bump that up to $100, 11,110, and we'll keep going as high as the subscribers keep going on YouTube.
Yeah. Do I win 90 if I win?
No. Come on.
And last time we did this with #win Devin's money.
Players and all of that, and finish dead last.
I'm going to.
Well, last year when we did this, we did #win Devin's money, and we gave away some money. So
3 people won last year, so it's definitely possible.
Yep. We were awful.
This time's going to be different. All right.
I tagged, so Devin had to pay.
Well, it was one of those things where I lost in all my contests, and I had to pay people. That sucked.
Yeah, it was a rough week, especially with John and Ryan and I intentionally tanking our lineups so that you'd have to pay people.
Yeah.
But that was fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
We had a good laugh about it.
So even if you don't get chosen and you haven't subscribed, head over to YouTube, subscribe, and let's get this thing to 10,000 and 11,000. Let's run this thing a couple times this year.
Yeah, that would be fun. Let's talk about wide receivers. I'm going to go to Ryan first for receivers. The guys that I have my eye on here, Michael Gallup looks like he's out for the Cowboys, so people might be on Devin Smith there. And then the Eagles receivers are looking very doubtful. Both Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey did not practice on Thursday. I don't think they're going to go. And then maybe Traquan Smith is looking like he might miss. I don't know that. Yeah, UCF. There you go. Ryan waved the sign for the injured guy. And then Sterling Shepard got in a practice on Thursday, a full practice. So it looks like he's going to go for the Giants. He looks like he cleared concussion protocol there. That's about all I've got on my list. Ryan, who do you like at wide receiver?
Yeah, so the Eagles receivers news there is the news you can use, so to speak. And I think we'll just get the obvious guy out of the way. Where are you going to find 8 or more targets for 3,600 or less other than Nelson Agholor this week? He did drop a potential game-winning 60-yard touchdown last week, but we don't care about that right now because he's still going to get the most targets among Eagles wide receivers this week. So, I think we'll talk about another Eagles pass catcher in the next section, but Agholor is the one you want at receiver, it seems like, especially for safety and comfort. So he's a cash game play. The ownership's so high. I'll let John talk about what he thinks about him as a GPP play. A couple other guys I like. I'm just a sucker for Arizona, I guess. I like both Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald. I like Kirk a little bit more, just a little upside, a little less ownership there. And then switching to GPPs here, I got a couple. One is Juju Smith-Schuster. So yes, he has Mason Rudolph throwing him the ball, but that is going to be the reason why he's on less than 5% of rosters. San Fran has allowed 2 100-yard receivers. Both were last week. They also allowed 53 yards and a touchdown to Chris Godwin in what we call the Jameis Winston disaster game in week 1. And Juju had 5 targets, 3 receptions, 57 yards in just 1 half with Rudolph last week, in an improv mode, right? So I think he's going to be targeted. I think that unless they get shut out, Juju's going to have some upside, I think. So he's somebody that I'm looking at. Just anytime you can get a number 1 receiver under 5%, it's worth a look. And then the other one I like is Kenny Golladay. He's another wide receiver 1, projected under 5% right now. The Eagles are a pass funnel defense. If you're going to move the ball against them, you're doing it via the pass. Stafford is throwing the ball deep this year, even though Detroit is a conservative game plan team. When they do throw, they are throwing deep, and Golladay is the guy that they've been using. The other one I do like is Sammy Watkins. So we're coming off of a game where Sammy Watkins was the worst receiver production-wise for Kansas City, but he did have 13 targets, and the other 2 players had 12 combined. Those being Demarcus Robinson and Mecole Hardman. So Watkins is still clearly the wide receiver 1 there. And so if Kansas City is going to score like they keep scoring, I think he'll be involved. I have a lot more on the list, but I'm sure the other guys want to talk too. So I'll go ahead and turn the mic over now and maybe come back if some guys haven't been mentioned.
Definitely. So Devin, you didn't care for the Sammy Watkins pick. Why not?
I just think that the Ravens have come out and basically said that Earl Thomas is going to be shadowing Watkins deep. So I think it's a situation that they may double him and try to force the other guys, Mecole Hardman and Demarcus Robinson, to beat them, which would probably be smart. But I have a lot of guys on my list too that haven't been mentioned. So Larry Fitz has been mentioned. Nelson Agholor has been mentioned. What does Emmanuel Sanders have to do to raise his price?
Agreed. He's on mine too.
I mean, he's the first guy I'm clicking in cash game. I don't know why he's 4,800 on DraftKings and 5,700 on FanDuel. It makes zero sense. Other than he played on Monday night but he had 11 catches for 98 yards and a touchdown against the Bears. I don't understand it. Similarly, what does John Brown have to do to raise his price? I don't know, because he's in a great matchup against Cincinnati this week, and he's 5,900 on FanDuel and 5,500 on DraftKings. John Brown, we typically think of as a guy who is very inconsistent, and he hasn't been so far this year. So he has 7 catches in both of his games against the Giants and the Jets, and really has looked pretty solid this year. If you're looking for a pivot off of Nelson Agholor, at 3,000 on DraftKings, Damiere Byrd has 7 targets in both of his first 2 games. So he's a guy who, if you want to go down there and you want to fade Larry Fitzgerald and you want to fade Christian Kirk, you're getting 7 targets at $3,000. Not saying that I'm doing it everywhere or in cash, but I think that he's a guy that if you want to pivot off of some of the more popular plays, is an option.
John, receivers.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. It's funny because these guys are talking. I like a lot of the cash game plays they mentioned. Devin, clarify. John Brown, cash?
I think so. On FanDuel, absolutely at 59 because it's not PPR and he has the upside. I mean, if he catches a long one on FanDuel, I think absolutely. DraftKings, my head is telling me no, but my heart is telling, or my head is telling me yes, but my heart is telling me no because I have this bias of John Brown that he's very inconsistent. And Josh, I don't trust that offense yet. And I probably should, but I'm not going to do it in DraftKings. I'm going to do it on FanDuel.
Yeah. And John,
just wanted to clarify.
And I'm curious, John, as you bring up some other receivers here, I see looking at our DFS lineup optimizer, I'm looking at Steve Buzzard's ownership projections next to these players, and there's about 10 of them over 10% owned. So I imagine there's some of these popular cash game picks that you're like, you know what, I'm probably going to be underweight in GPPs, and I'm curious about your take on that.
Typically, that's the truth. Unless it's somebody I think that has a lot of upside, and what I'll do then is I'll go way over the field to try to get an advantage. It's just a simple game strategy perspective. Looking at that top 10 there, off the cuff, a player I really like a lot this week is Keenan Allen. He's 22% right now. If you made me decide tonight, and I always have all of my final stances on these players in tips and picks on Saturday afternoon, but Keenan Allen would be one I would be overweight on at 22%. I think that he's just seen some monstrous action in that offense, and he's got an excellent matchup this weekend, so I would want to get ahead of the field on him. Agholor at 33% to answer the question that Ryan asked earlier. I suspect as we go into the weekend, that actually goes up closer, creeping to 40%. I'm going to be underweight. He had a great week last week, 3,600 though. I mean, they've got other guys. They got Devin's buddy, White Claw, right? I'm kidding. I know it's Whiteside, but that was I had to do that, right? But this guy, last week
YouTube comments.
He played I think 95% of the snaps last week and didn't get any targets. I suspect he's going to get some, and he's right around site minimum if I'm not mistaken. I think there are some nice pivots there. We'll talk about Zach Ertz in a minute. And even Matt Collins, deep play potential there. So I think there's a lot of different ways the Eagles, including the running game, could go. And Agholor, I could see him on the outside looking in at 40% owned. I mean, you take a huge jump if he fails there. I'll have him in cash games, but I'm not so sure about GPPs. Other guys I'm looking at, let's talk about the New England Patriots with their 33 points implied team total. I talked about Sony Michel earlier and how much I liked him. But if you're like Devin, you say, I don't think that Michel's going to do it and it's going to go through the air. You say, who's the most exciting receiver on the Patriots? And it's going to be my last time to get him for a week or two. It's going to be Antonio Brown. You're not going to like this where I'm going, Ryan. Excuse me.
I agree.
It's Antonio Brown's the most exciting guy on the Patriots. And who's the guy that I can count on that's always getting targets? It's Julian Edelman. And those guys are both going to be highly owned. I'm going to try to scroll through quickly. Edelman's only 4%. I'm actually surprised by that. If Edelman's 4%, go overweight on that.
Steve has Brown under 6 also. Yeah,
I think Steve's going to be off base on this. Sorry, Steve, buddy. I think these are going to be off. But the one I'm going to talk about here is Josh Gordon. Josh Gordon last week played 80+% of the snaps, and he got shut down by Xavier Howard, which in this day and age is not surprising. That guy's doing a lot to shut folks down. And I suspect of the three receivers I just mentioned, he's going to be the one who's lowest owned, and he's the most affordable of those three. So he's the guy in GPPs that I'll be looking to capitalize and stack with Tom Brady. I think he has 2 touchdown upside, and if he comes in at, I'm going to guess somewhere around 3% on Sunday, that's huge upside for a guy who's so low owned on a team with a 30-plus implied team total.
Ryan, I'm going to pitch it back to you for you to name a receiver that gets named on every show and hasn't been mentioned yet. Who do you got?
Before I talk about him, one guy that I did want to call out here in the game of the year of the week is Marquise Brown, whose snaps increased from 18% in week 1 to 65% last week. 5 targets week 1, 13 last week. So he's just a big play waiting to happen in a game that should be full of them. So he's on my GPP list as well. Yeah, and I guess we didn't mention Mr. Jones yet, did we? It's hard at the top of receiver. They all seem like they're discounted a little bit, but, you know, I like Keenan Allen better. I don't know. It's tough. What do you guys think? This is actually not a big Julio week for me, despite that every week seems to be. I'm not feeling it right now, which means probably you should play him.
It's the same thing I said last year, always or never.
I guess.
If you want to build your lineups this week in a contrarian way for GPPs, we're talking Millie Maker, anything more than 10,000 entries, and you want to be contrarian, start at the top of the wide receiver lines. Look at DeAndre Hopkins. Look at Devontae Adams. Look at Michael Thomas, Julio Jones. Those guys are going to be low owned because everybody's going to be trying to jam in those running backs we talked about already. Just by doing that, you're not going to be able to field those high owned, high value running backs. And just by doing that, you're going to be so differentiated from the masses. And I would not be surprised. In fact, if you made me bet tonight, I would say that lineup build wins GPPs on Sunday. It's not going to feel comfortable, but you know what? That's what wins big tournaments.
Yeah, it's got to feel just a little bit uncomfortable, but not like super crazy.
Yeah.
Devin, let's talk about tight ends. Who you like this week?
Do we have to?
Nope.
You have to pick one.
I know I have to pick one. I can't pick Kelsey, obviously, because I don't have the salary for him. I'm going a guy who might be older than John.
No way.
Is that possible?
Vinatieri?
Did he announce games last year?
He was about to announce games last year and didn't, in Greg Olsen. So I think that Kyle Allen for the Panthers is going to look down to his tight end. The Cardinals have been one of the worst teams against the tight ends this year and over the past several years. The worst. There you go.
Worst.
I think it's a nice security blanket for the young quarterback looking for his veteran. At 3,700 on DraftKings, he provides a nice salary relief that clearly I desperately need because I like all the running backs this week.
John, who do you like at tight end?
Well, I haven't done my roster builds, so I'm not going to claim that I can afford him, but I think Zach Ertz is the right play this week at 5,700, given all the problems we talked about the Eagles wide receivers. And before you put it into the comments, I'll tell you, yes, I think you can play Nelson Agholor and Zach Ertz in cash games on DraftKings because they'll cost you a collective 9,300, and I think you'll probably capture about 70% of the targets on that team by doing so. So, yes, you can. If you want to go a little bit lower than that and save some salary, the guy that's popping off of our projections, H-value, IVCs, all that kind of thing, Mark Andrews has looked the real deal in Baltimore this year. He's 4,600 on DraftKings, 8,900 on Fantasy Draft. I think those guys are the two I'd be looking at in cash games. In GPPs, Devin already called out one of my favorites. That's Greg Olsen. If you go over to some of our tools, trying to pull it up as I'm talking, fantasy points allowed against tight ends this year, Arizona has allowed 31 points per game to the position. The next one down is 50% less at 21. Arizona's gotten throttled without Patrick Peterson, just kind of is the glue that holds that secondary together. Last week, Mark Andrews went 8, 112, and 1. Even Hayden Hurst got a little dinky touchdown. The week prior to that, TJ Hawkinson blew up on them. And here we got Olsen with a young quarterback who's going to be looking to him as a security blanket. I think that's the direction I want to go. And then maybe somebody who I think is not going to be highly owned. Well, I like actually two. I'm going to go back. One is not going to be highly owned. Jared Cook, 3,800 against Seattle. Seattle's allowed the third most fantasy points to the tight end position this year, and they're going to have a pair of quarterbacks who I don't think are going to go deep in Taysom Hill and Teddy Bridgewater. I think between the two of them, they only had one 20-yard pass last week. And then, sorry, Ryan, I'm going to steal yours. Vance McDonald. No, he wasn't on your list. 4,300 last week when Mason Rudolph came in. I think he threw a pair of touchdowns, and both of them were to McDonald. He's probably too cheap at 4,300. I think he brings a substantial talent, and obviously there was a connection between these two last week. So on the GPP side, those are the ones I'd be focusing on.
Ryan, who is left over from who hasn't been mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I knew this one was going to be bottom of the barrel, so I'm kind of glad I was last. But GPP wise, right? We like talented players in bad situations. Well, this player is in a bad situation because he has been terrible.
Don't say OJ Howard.
But I'm going to pick OJ Howard because the Giants have been brutal against receivers so far this year, especially slot receivers. And I do want to be clear, like when we're talking about defense,
you know who their slot receiver is, right? Chris Godwin.
OJ Howard's their third receiver. So OJ Howard runs seam routes. OJ Howard can score on plays that Randall Cobb scored on in week 1. It was a 20-something yard touchdown. I think there's a little squeaky wheel narrative street involved here. They've been talking for over a week now. Remember, they played last Thursday. There was a few days to game plan for last Thursday. He obviously wasn't part of it, but now they've heard for weeks about how they've got this talented player that they're wasting. I think the coaches are being asked about it probably more than they like. And he's a very talented player, and he's not going to be very highly thought of this week. Everybody's going to be on Greg Olsen. He's $100 more. So we talk sometimes about leveraging and price pivoting. And you can make the same lineup with Greg Olsen, but just put OJ Howard in essentially. It's a risk. I'm not saying it's a safe play, but super talented guy who brings some upside. And you guys, frankly, took every other tight end that I wanted to talk about. So who else was I going to say at this point, right?
Good luck with that.
Please thumbs up the video. Thank you for watching. We've still got tight ends we just talked about. We still got defenses and stacks to talk about before we wrap up the show. Defenses, it seems like we should have a lot of really good options with all of these heavy favorites. Devin, sometimes you get a little crazy with your defenses and cash.
I'm not doing that again. No.
What are you doing this week?
Taking Dallas against Miami and Josh Rosen. It's a no-brainer this week. I think that Josh Rosen didn't beat out Ryan Fitzpatrick, and Ryan Fitzpatrick was absolutely terrible. Dallas has one of the best defense. They're not New England level, and the reason I don't like New England is I don't see the upside that New England has as much as I do with Dallas, because I think Luke Falk takes that conservative game plan that we talked about earlier and does more of the dink and dunk. He completed 80% of his passes last week against Cleveland. And I think Dallas and this Miami team is one of the worst teams, if not the worst team of all time. So this is a prime opportunity for Josh Rosen to have a brutal day.
Yeah, that's a pretty safe call. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think in cash games, it's going to be Dallas, even though you're really paying a premium for them this week. I don't think I remember a defense this high on DraftKings at 4,300. And, for what it's worth, we're talking about, like, where are you saving salary? Worst case scenario to the listeners and viewers out there, if you're going to punt a position, always punt this position. You find something that doesn't make you sick to your stomach and just roll with it, because you're not going to – last week Chalk did win. I'll talk about this in a second. The Patriots scored 37 points, if I'm not mistaken. That is very rare where the Chalk hits at the defense position that way. And that's for cash games and GPPs for what it's worth. So if you could slot Dallas in at 4,300, I feel pretty strongly that they'll deliver.
Such a homer pick. Such a homer pick. You're such a Dallas fan.
It is a homer pick. Yeah, I am. And then, New England is 3,800 beneath them, and I think that, you could drop down there. I don't know that I would do that. I think I would either go with Dallas at 4,300 or drop way down to somebody else. Looking at my list here, there's nobody I love, but maybe Minnesota at 3,300 at home is a team that I would consider. What I will say is, looking at Buzzard's ownership projections for the week, he's got the Patriots entering Thursday night at 18%. If that ends up happening on Sunday, I might do a total fade of the Patriots after what they did last week. Part of it is because of what Devin said. I think that the Jets will play ball control as much as they can with a young quarterback. And part of it is this defense, team defense, is the most volatile position in the game that we play, DFS. And I think you have a huge leg up if the Patriots get 3 sacks and allow 2 touchdowns. They score 11 points at 3,800. You have a huge upside because you've exposed yourself to a bunch of other teams on a day that they don't score 37 points. That could backfire. Maybe they score 37 again. But tonight, anybody who wants to bet me they score more than 37 points, put it in the comments, and I'll bet $90 so that I can make up the money I'm going to win next week when Devin's not going to pay me out for winning that contest.
Hashtag power play.
Ryan, what do you think of these defenses?
I mean, the Dallas New England debate is obvious, and those are cash game plays. But when is the defensive chalk going to hit 2 weeks in a row, and when is it going to hit for 30 points? So it's not. So let's just go.
Miami could just be this garbage, right?
It could be, but
they're not scoring 30, but they could score 15 or 20 every week.
Sure, but for 4,300, I mean, what if I get 11 points for 2,500 instead?
In a GPP, 100% agree.
I have 3 GPP plays, and I'll just list them kind of in order of salary here. How about Buffalo? So Buffalo goes home. They have a very good pass defense. Cincinnati is passing on 80% of its neutral script plays. Defensive teams in fantasy gain points by sacks, by interceptions, by fumbles. So you get a lot of strip sacks, a lot of interceptions. What you don't want is the team just handing off every down, and you don't want to be opposing that team. So Buffalo is going to have a chance to get after Andy Dalton on 4 out of every 5 neutral script plays, and they're going to be doing so at home. And they also have very good corners. Secondly, these next 2 are both the same salary. They're both 2,500 on DraftKings. Deshaun Watson gets sacked a lot, right? And LA Chargers tend to rush the passer pretty well. So 2,500, the LA Chargers hosting Houston is another one I like. And then the other 2,500 I like is, do you guys remember a time when Lamar Jackson used to not be able to pass and used to fumble a lot? Kansas City Chiefs are at home. The only thing I don't like is they don't have that Tyreek Hill punt return touchdown upside, but it's a team. Kansas City always has one or two of these weird games where they're at home and their defense just does a bunch of important things. So it's a dart throw. It's a low percentage thing, but if you're just going stone minimum because you want other position player guys,
I can get behind all those plays in GPP. I will say that, I know. Buffalo is a run funnel defense in the sense that I think so far they're like 27th DVOA against the run and 4th against the pass. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not the Bengals adjust some of what you described to try to combat that. But you didn't give us a cash game play, and I think that's important. So the 2 that Devin and I called out were the high end. Do you like anything at the low ends for cash?
No, not really. I mean, I didn't see anything. Right. To be honest.
Fair, but it's but that's the difficult thing this week is, are you going to feel comfortable going down? And if there is one, of the 3 you mentioned, I think Buffalo is probably the safest for what it's worth, but I do think it's difficult to go down too far.
You talked Minnesota looking at it. I don't mind Minnesota either against Oakland, but I mean, Oakland probably wants to run, but hopefully Minnesota can force them into that. I could just see that game being super slow and boring and not a lot of turnovers and things. So
If you're looking to save, I also don't hate the Niners against Pittsburgh. Let's talk stacks. John, hit me with your stacks.
Oh, I wrote down a bunch because I normally go last here. I like 2 Allen stacks. I like Allen to Brown, and I suspect that a few of you guys already.
I already said do it every week.
Yeah, well, this week I like it. I'm not a big fan of Josh Allen. I don't know that I think he's a great fantasy quarterback, but not a great NFL quarterback. But this week I do love that respective matchup in terms of personnel. I also like Allen to Olsen, which I think Ryan called out. So those are 2 guys that I like. In terms of other stacks, what didn't we talk about? Aaron Rodgers to MVS, Marquez Valdez Scantling. I think that's one that nobody's looking at. He's looked really good, Valdez Scantling. And a lot of folks, if you're gonna grab a piece of Aaron Rodgers this week, they're gonna go with Devontae Adams. So don't sleep on that one. It'll be low owned, and I think it brings some significant upside if you look at the way they've been using MVS in that game. In terms of game stacks, I already talked about it. Arizona, Carolina, get all the players you can in that game. I think that game could score 60 plus points. And then Devin's gonna love this one. If you can afford it, Dak to Zeke Elliott, and then take your pick between Devin Smith or Amari Cooper, and you can have all 35 of the Dallas Cowboys points. And if you want to run it back with somebody, run it back with Devontae Parker maybe, who's 4,000, and he's going to have about 4,000 targets. So, a lot of ways to go this week. It's a really interesting week.
Don't bother running it back. Devin, who do you got? As a Dolphins fan, don't bother.
They don't score.
Yeah. Devin, who are you stacking?
DJ? No, I'm just kidding. He's playing on Thursday night. Sad. But he did score a touchdown tonight. Dak and Amari is probably my favorite. Like John mentioned. I'm going to go Patrick Mahomes and let's go McCole Hardman, because I think that he will be the guy that has he had a long touchdown called back last week. He would have had a very similar stat line as Demarcus Robinson, and I think people are going to overlook that a little bit. That they're just going to see that Robinson had the 100 yards in the big game, and Hardman would have had that too if it wasn't for a holding call. And I do like the Rodgers. I don't know if I like MVS, but I kind of like Adams there because I'm more of a chalk play. But, yeah. Russell Wilson to Tyler Lockett. Why not?
That's a good one.
Yeah. Nobody's talking about that passing game, and Wilson just had a great game last week.
Ryan, who you stacking?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I can say these with as much conviction as Devin did, but I'll do my best.
Look, my part of this section is to say John Brown and Josh Allen, and then I punch it over to you guys. So.
Yeah, I'm just, he took that from you, and he took the Devin from Ohio State from you, so you just had nothing.
I have like 3 things written down for every position. If those are gone, I'm just making things up on the fly.
All right.
And now that we can't talk about Matt Bryant anymore, oh my gosh. It's like
I can't talk about DJ Chark. Like, I'm just a mess today.
He's out. Yeah, Devin doesn't erase his notes from week to week. That's the secret. Patrick Mahomes cash, DJ Chark. So anyways, so a little bit of a double leverage play here, right? So we talked about Nelson Agholor being super highly rostered. Pretty similar price. JJ Arcega-Whiteside, John mentioned him, and he played nearly all the snaps last week. He didn't do much, but he wasn't expected to play. Now he has all week to practice, and they can work in some plays for him. So from price standpoint, he's a pivot off of Agholor. From a game standpoint, a lot of people are going to be on Zach Ertz. So you're in the right, you kind of, with GPPs and leverage, you're looking for the right situation, but maybe the alternate play. So Carson Wentz and JJ Arcega-Whiteside is one. And then, of course, if you want a piece of the game of the year of the week, Lamar Jackson, Marquise Brown, Mecole Hardman for a game stack there, Baltimore, Kansas City. And then the other one I had John mentioned was just Dak Prescott and Devin Smith, just the go away from Xavier Howard play there. That's always good against Miami.
Jameis and Godwin.
There's one more. I like it. Parting thoughts, fellows. Who has a parting thought that they would like to share? Words of wisdom, Ryan has a parting thought.
I'll go first.
Do it.
Be aware of the defense versus position stats. We're 2 weeks in. In trend spotting this week, I wrote kind of a real versus noisy section about teams that have been significantly better or worse this year than they were last year. Last year's data has 16 games, and then when you factor in personnel changes and now 2 data points, there's going to be some big swings. Like Jacksonville looks bad against the pass, but half of their games are against Kansas City so far this year. So we can't take that like gospel. So John cited a couple of defense versus position stats earlier tonight, but he also cited some backup information, right? Arizona's been poor against tight ends. Well, it's only 2 games, but also Carolina has thrown a lot to Greg Olsen, and we have a rookie quarterback who may check down, who checked down in his only start last year. So don't just take these defense versus position stats as gospel. Make sure you're looking at the entire picture. So especially early in the year.
I like that. Sound advice. Devin, parting thoughts.
Yeah, so just to make a quick announcement more than a parting thought, I'm making a change to my FanDuel article that I took over from David Dodd. So based on feedback, I ran a blog last year, which basically gave away my cash game lineups. I had Sunday morning updates. People like the Sunday morning updates, so we're going to add those back in as far as if I've made changes to my FanDuel lineup on Sunday morning. So instead of keeping the article static on Saturdays, we're going to add it in. It's called Cracking FanDuel on footballguys.com.
Nice. I like it. People liked that last year. Thanks for bringing it back. John, parting thoughts.
I think I kind of previewed this earlier, or at least teased it a little bit. I think, one thing we don't talk about a lot, I know that Devin, he might disagree with this, but at one point in time, he disagrees with a lot. At one point in time, I was a 1 cash game lineup guy, and I would either sink or swim on that. And over time, I've gotten to be more of a 5 cash game lineup guy, assuming I like enough players. If I have a lot of conviction about certain players, I certainly do that. But I want to throw it out there as an idea to some of the viewers, listeners. Don't be afraid to do this. We have, at this point in time, we have the lineup optimizer. You can go in there. You can select a player pool. Let's say you like Pat Mahomes and you want a little bit of Kyler Murray as an alternative quarterback in your cash games. You can select it so that you get 75% of your lineups with one and 25% with another, and you can then go down the line and you have a pool of running backs and a pool of wide receivers, and ask the lineup optimizer to kick out 5 lineups. Ask it to kick out 10 for what it's worth, and then pick the 5 that you like most, and then enter those into your cash game lineups. What it does is it provides you a little bit of diversity in terms of players, and somebody gets injured. Last week I had a lot of David Johnson, not necessarily in cash, but in GPP. But diversifying yourself, it's almost like a mutual fund. Those of you who are investors, getting yourself away from single stocks and into mutual funds, it lowers your downside and raises kind of your upside. And Devin, I said enough because he's shaking his head at me. Say again?
Can I counter?
Counter.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily disagree with your logic of diversifying. I disagree with your logic of running what you deem suboptimal lineups out there. What I do is I don't play 50-50s or double ups. And the reason is it's basically an all or nothing proposition that you're either going to win them all or you're going to lose them all. Instead, what I do is I join 50 to 100 to 150 unique head-to-head games. And it basically does very similar to what you're talking about, in that if my lineup finishes in the 30th percentile of lineups, I don't lose everything. I don't lose everything. I lose, I win 30% and I lose 70% of my games. So I diversify that way with a single lineup. If you're playing double ups and 50-50s, I do agree that you should run multiple lineups to diversify, but I do it a little bit different way in that I only play head-to-heads. And I make sure that all of my head-to-heads are against unique players. I pick them instead of just posting them out there so I can't get scooped. So it's a similar concept. It's just you should be diversifying in some way.
We don't disagree, because that's I don't just play head-to-heads though. And so from that end, I think you're right in the sense that from what you described, you're getting diversification from your opponents. But I do both. And because of that, I run out multiple lineups. most weeks. There are weeks where I just love my cash game lineup and I run it out and, it's ride or die. But I think that these are things that people should be thinking about. Don't just do the same thing every week and look back and say it worked or it didn't work and that's it. You have to be evolving with the game and thinking about new ways to build lineups and to approach your games. And there's a lot to be thinking about here. And when you become complacent, you're going to watch your bankroll dwindle.
Yeah, nothing makes me more sad than seeing people have four 0% return weeks in a row because they had a cold streak in their cash game lineups, but they missed by 2 points, for example. If you miss the cash game line by 2 points and you're doing an all head-to-head strategy, you're basically breaking even still. You're losing the rake.
Yep. Great points, guys, about game selection and how you approach your play. That's awesome advice. Check out our content over at footballguys.com. We'll be back next Friday with our Week 4 episode. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Ryan Hester, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy.
#PowerPlay.
To check out our content at footballguys.com, click the button on Devin's face. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click on the giant video in front of Ryan's face. Click any of those now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.